So what is voice? Voice stands for Voice for Indian Causes and Engagement, and it's a result of hard work and efforts of a team of dedicated professionals across disciplines from India, US, and elsewhere. The objective of voice is to provide a objective and a balanced construct of India's civilizational past while providing a nuanced perspective into cultural, social, and other issues impacting Indian ecosystem. India, not South Asia, how do we reclaim our narrative? This topic could not be more timely given that there is a concerted and a deliberate attempt to brand us Indians as South Asians. We are still stuck in the age old European paradigm. To say that a nation or a civilization uh, gains credibility only if there's a textual validation is to trivialize them. We'll have to break ourselves free of these age old dogmas and regain our cultural identity. And to know how we can do that, we have today with us Mr. Sankrant Sanu. He is probably the best person to talk on this topic. Mr. Sankrant Sanu is an entrepreneur, writer, and a researcher. And he is also the founder and CEO of Garuda Prakashan. Mr. Sanu is also involved in a lot of consulting and other social projects. Welcome, Mr. Sankrantji.
Hello. Namaskar. Welcome.
Over to you, Mr. Sankrantji, for your perspective on how we can reclaim the narrative that we are Indians and not South Asians.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me see if I can share my screen because I do have a presentation. Just one moment. Okay. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So we have to answer really two questions here. First one is, what is India? And the second one is, why does this whole designation of South Asia not really work? So we're going to start with the first of these, which is what is really India. When the British conquered India, let me see, is the slides moving? Yeah. So this is the counterpoint. So this is the counterpoint that was put forth by the British. There's a very influential book written by a Sir John Strachey, and this book was called India in some editions, and India and its Administration in Progress in some other editions. And this book became kind of the standard textbook by which administrators in India were trained, bureaucrats, and so on and so forth. And also this was very influential in how India was taught about. So one of the things that this book says is that the first and the most essential thing to remember about India is that there is not and never was in India possessing any sort of unity, physical, political, social, religious, no Indian nation, no people of India. So this is really the counterpoint, if you would, to our discussion. So one of the assumptions when we say there is no India, and this is a narrative which is coming from the West, which is telling us there is no India, we have to ask, if there is no India, what else was there? Implying that the idea is that India is not a valid nation, it doesn't have historicity, it's a made-up thing, the British created India. If all that is true, then we also have to look at who is it that is talking about this, which people are talking about this. So we'll do a short world tour, mainly of the West here. I have other presentations you can see on the internet, which goes through all of the world. So here we're going to focus on the West. So firstly, let's look at even in 475 AD, there is a map of India where there's a fairly big unification of most of what is called India today. So this is not something that comes up now. But let's look at what's happening at the map of Europe in 475 AD. This is right when the Saxons first start moving into what is now known as the Great Britain or the United Kingdom, and Europe is doesn't resemble really anything of the European countries today. So if the unchanging political boundaries is considered as the sign of legitimacy, then clearly no European country is legitimate today based on a map of that time. If you do a quick tour, we start from 180. You have this is what the map in 180 of Europe looks like. The Roman Empire is there. It has taken over swaths of territory, and there is no real country of the kind which exists today. And this map doesn't change a whole lot as we are going forward, looking at different time sessions. It's only in 1000 AD that we have little bits of today's Europe emerging, but again, the no boundary is really mapping to the country of today. There's a lot of difference, even if you look at this area of Spain, whether you look at what is now known as Italy, what is now known as Greece, a lot, pretty much all of it is not on the boundaries that it is today. So if you were looking at what a country's legitimacy based on unchanging physical boundaries, then obviously no country in Europe is legitimate today. So let's go forward. And again, 1800 AD is still, there's a large swath, not quite the boundaries of today. 1900, you see Germany is occupying a large area, which again shrinks in World War II. It gets broken up. All of these things are happening. Then it gets reunified. There's other things. So here Portugal comes out in the side. There was a different thing earlier. So all of these countries have been having constant political change, boundary change over the millennia. And this is what it looks like almost today. Now let's look at another one. This is the United States of America. Again, so when we are questioning India never existed, this history, of course, we know that the United States is very recent, right? But nobody is going around questioning the very legitimacy of the United States in the same form that they're saying, well, India never existed and so on and so forth. So let's just go and look into what does the US look like. If you look in 1776, this is pretty much what the current map or the current United States, this is where it is situated, and just the original 13 colonies. Going forward, you have some expansion is happening westwards, and it's starting to go on. And again, remember, this is 1800 AD. The British have already come to India by that time, 1757, as the Battle of Plassey. All of that has been happened. So you have, this is where the United States is at that time, right? 1861, you have some expansion that is happening. New states are being added. And if you look at what the United States is today, again, here the confederate states are separate. And if you look at it, really is 1912, barely 100 years ago, that the United States comes to look like what we know it today. So if you were looking at the immutability of political boundaries, clearly there is nothing in the Western world that is a legitimate um, country or nation state. And this idea also came up again from a European conception. In my much more detailed talks, I go into this whole idea of nation state, the Treaty of Westphalia. There's a lot of European history and baggage that comes with all these terms also. But I'm not going to go into that right now. Going to come back to this idea that this India never really existed. So it's very strange that there's no India, but Britain forms the East India Company. So obviously there was some conception of India when the British formed the East India Company, and obviously they founded the East India Company before they came to India. So it couldn't be that India came into existence because of the British, or the British created India, because, as I said, the East India Company is something that the British create before they come to India. And there is this whole quest to find India, quest to find a trade route to India that starts with Christopher Columbus is out to find the trade route to India, and he discovers America actually. So, and before that, Vasco da Gama is trying to get to India. So there's all of these things that are, all the Europeans are desperate to find a way to India. Why are they desperate to find a way to India? Because there's a lot of trade. Pretty much Europe exports a lot of things from India. India needs almost nothing from Europe. This is why Europe is trying to desperately find a way to get to India. And with the Middle East going out of Christian control, with the rise of Islam, the land routes were kind of controlled by others. So this is why Europe wanted to find a direct route to India. Again, everybody is clear that this is India. In fact, even in BC times, there is Megasthenes' book called Indica. So this whole term India is very, very old. It's at least 3,000 years old. So let's actually look into this a little bit of detail. So as I said, if you look at simply changing political boundaries, this is true for the entire world actually. The boundaries, political boundaries of the world have changed throughout history. The question we ask is, was there an idea of Bharat? Was there an idea of India, idea of Bharat that was present even with all of the political change or the kingdoms changing and so on and so forth? And what we'll find is something really interesting. If I just look at the physical map of the world, of this region of the world, you will notice that you can actually pick out India, Bharat, almost distinct from everything else just by a physical map. So they were the boundaries of the Himalayas, and then there's the ocean in the south, and there's a very, very distinct landmass that comes visible even on a physical map. Now, were there political dynasties? Of course, even in 265 BC, we find the Mauryan dynasty is covering almost all of India. So it's not as if it wasn't politically unified. That has existed. But the more interesting thing is, was there a notion that the people of India, the people of Bharat, regarded themselves as a common people? And as far back as the Rig Veda, we find this Vishwamitrasya Rakshati Brahmedam Bharatam Janam. So the notion that there is the people of India is as old as the Rig Veda. The people of Bharat is as old as the Rig Veda. The Vishnu Puran is even clearer. It says, in the south is the ocean, in the north is the Himalayas. Again, refer back, or south of the Himalayas, this land exists, often called Bharat. So Again, very, very old references to the people of this area. So it's not just a geographic entity. There was a self-awareness of the people of Bharat that they are that there is some commonality between them, and then what this land is called. So this is again very old references. One of the very interesting other things is that we have the, if you take Europe for instance, you can have some notion of Europe, but that Europe was not seen as a unity in the similar way that India was seen as a unity. For instance, even today in the Sanskrit prayers, we have the rivers of the country being enumerated. We have this very fervent conception of the land of Bharat being one, as I said earlier, in terms of the people of India. And again, all there are these epic poems and these stories that completely link India. So Mahabharat, for instance, again, Bharat is part of Mahabharat. There is obviously an idea of Bharat to say Mahabharat, and you find there is a pan Indian story of Mahabharat. There are peoples and kings that are coming from all over Bharat to participate in the Mahabharata in a way. Similarly, if you look at the Ramayana, there's a complete linkage that goes from the north to the south. There's a wonderful map by actually D.K. Hari that I had tweeted recently, where there's literally the entire voyage of Rama is mapped from the south to the north, going across India. And it's amazing that those places which possibly 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 years old, whenever that Ramayana happened, there's some multiple scholarships right now that's emerging on when exactly the Ramayana takes place. But the interesting thing is that even after those thousands of years, if you go to those places today in India, the locals will say, yes, this is where Ram stopped on the bank of the Ganga. This is where the Panchvati was. All of those things have still some remnants in local memory, which is absolutely extraordinary. If you look at how old this event was, and how this conception of the unity of the land and these places has been carried from there. There's no equivalent. If you look at Europe, if you look at pretty much the West, there's absolutely no equivalent to this kind of civilizational continuity. I'll give you another example, and this is, did the people of India conceive of themselves as a whole? And this is very interesting example again. There is a young boy whose name is Shankaracharya, who gets called as Adi Shankaracharya. He comes from a village in Kerala, and from this village in Kerala, he does this Digvijay Yatra, which is he's going across all of India, and he established mathas in these different places of India. If you notice his voyage and where he established the mathas, they literally form a diamond, which is circumscribing India, and he goes all the way to Srinagar in Kashmir, and there's a hill called Shankaracharya Hill in Kashmir. So from Kerala to Kashmir, his entire voyage is linking India. Not only is the voyage linking India, he has a very deliberate conception of India where he sets up these mathas on the four corners of India. So one has to have a complete conception of India as a unity to be able to even do that. There's another very extraordinary story. There are these Shakti Peethams, these temples that are based on Shakti, and there is a story that Shakti's was, the whole story of Shiva and Shakti, and how Shakti's body was cut up into all these different pieces. But the more interesting thing is that these pieces, and Shakti is really manifest of energy. So the energy body landed across many different places. But where are these places? These places are all in India, which means that somebody had a conception of India Whether that story is true or not true about Shakti is not interesting. But the fact is that people conceived of that story, and not only did they conceive of the story, if you map the different parts of Shakti, you'll see there's almost a figure of a woman which is being transposed over all of the Indian landmass. So what an extraordinary conception, and what an extraordinary conception of unity, that this whole thing was one thing, which is why, when something like the partition happens, or something um, cuts, it's almost like cutting a body. And this is what, this is why partition was such a traumatic event, because this body of Bharat, in a way, has been cut off, and some places are now outside the landmass of India, or outside what is the Indian state today, versus the conception of Bharat in India that has existed for so long. So, and then the other question people ask is, okay, fine, you're using Bharat, but what about India? Is this term, how old is this term India? As I said, India, Inde, Indica, Hindu, even from China to Greece, you will find that this term has been in vogue for at least 2 to 3,000 years. And that term itself also originates from Sanskrit. So the word India, or Hindu, or Inde, they come from the word Sindhu. So the Sa, because they couldn't pronounce it in the Middle East, the Sa became a Ha, so it became from Sindhu to Hindu. And then as you know, if you know Spanish, H is silent, so the H gets dropped and it becomes Hindu. And of course, Hindu has also a meaning in Sanskrit as well. So even the word India has a lot of rootedness in the civilization of Bharat and the civilization of India. So now this gives you a context for what I call South Asianism. And there was an article of mine on Medium that went a little bit viral. You can look at it. It's grpr.in/Indian, not South Asian. And what I would say is, just go to Medium and search for my name. You'll find this article. And one of the things we have to now look at is, where did this term South Asian suddenly pop up? Now, before we look at South Asian, we have to look at the term Asia itself. Asia is how the people of Europe, or really people of mostly Greece, are referring to Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, or eastern side of Turkey. And that's really the conception of Asia. Later on, this starts expanding. Even, if you look at the early Greek maps of the 4th, 5th century BC, they have this notion of Asia, but India is actually separate even in their mind from Asia. And at some point, we'll also go into why, even from a geology standpoint and other standpoints, India is actually a distinct continental plate, which goes into the continent of Asia. But forget that for a moment. Even in the Western conception, as I said, Asia has been a distinct thing. India has been a distinct thing. It is only more recently that India, when you conceive Asia as a continent, India starts becoming part of that. But there was this never was this term South Asian being used. It's very interesting. Nobody is saying North Asian people. Nobody is. If you look at Italian Americans, nobody is clubbing all of the people of Southern Europe as South European American. There is no word like South European American that is being used. The word uses Italian American. The word uses Chinese American. But in the case of India, this term South Asia is pushed, and it starts becoming current, in around the 1950s. And this is the time when the Cold War is happening. The 40s and the 50s, the US, there is actually a CIA funded initiative around foreign studies. So the CIA needs to have foreign studies department to study, other people, starting with Russia, and that then morphs into foreign studies department. All these departments are set up. And South Asia is a term which is deliberately pushed, and also it is pushed later on from the India and so-called progressive circles as well. And it is pushed because of this idea that there is no India. As I said, the British had said earlier, there is no India. And South Asianism basically says that this region consists of a bunch of sub-nationalities. There is no conception of India. It is improper to say anything in India. There are sub-nationalities that can be configured at will, and therefore let us use this term South Asia, and let us go not try to not use India. And here, if you look at these other two maps that I'm showing, the blue line is actually the blue line is Indian American, the green line is Chinese American, and the red line is Italian American. So in the 1990s, Indian American is much more prevalent. I'm using Google Ngrams here to have a notion of where how frequent these terms are relative to each other in the books that are being scanned. So in the 1990s, Indian American actually, there's a rise of Indian Americans. A lot of people are gaining prominent positions. There's a rise of Indian Americans, and the term is actually much more in vogue than Chinese American or Italian American. And then what we find is we find a concerted push to replace Indian American by South Asian American or by South Asian. I went to a film festival in the University of Washington. There were films by different from different countries of origin. So there were Chinese films, there were Vietnamese films, and the most films were from this one. So they have these categories: Chinese films, Vietnamese films, and then South Asian films. So there is no India mention. All of these films of South Asia were actually from India, but there's like a prohibition in the academy to mention India. And in fact, there was a concerted effort by some set of academics also to replace the term India in textbooks with South Asia. Again, as I said, South Asia is a Cold War neologism, new term invented essentially to deny India. There are no North Asian people. You don't talk about North Asian people. You don't talk about, as I said, there's no South European Americans. You simply don't classify other people this way. But it's a Cold War trope. It's a term of cultural erasure to erase India. And its effects are showing, because if you look at the bottom right chart, you see the blue line, which is high in the 1990s, starts to decline. And the South Asian American starts to increase to the point that now South Asian American has intersected Indian American and is used more commonly than Indian American. Again, as a very deliberate strategy that has come from the American Academy to say India is not legitimate, South Asia is what we should use. And the real tragedy is that so many people of Indian origin in the United States have internalized this colonialism, internalized this Cold War terminology, and are quote proudly referring to themselves as South Asian. This is a term which has no roots. It really doesn't even exist before the turn of the middle of the 20th century. It's a Cold War trope, and the only reason it really is created is to deny India. What you'll see is, you'll find all over, you'll see South Asian fiction, South Asian films, 90% or more of that, sometimes even 100% of those, when you actually look at each of the people involved, will be coming from India or of Indian origin. But they will be deliberately erased into this South Asian term, which people of India and Indian origin have absolutely no reason to really to really get into. So that's the presentation for now, and we can take some questions. Feel free to be in touch with me. Please follow me on Twitter at Sankrant if you're on Twitter, and we can have continue this dialogue there too. Do look up my two articles. You can look for South Asian is a term of cultural erasure. This is on Medium, and then there's my website sankrant.org, which has this article called "Why India is a Nation," which has a lot of this data, and then there are other talks as well that you can find. Thank you. Over to you, back.
Thank you, Mr. Shankranji. That was really a very enlightening talk. I'm sure a lot of the facts that many of the people still don't know till date. I have a few questions for you. When we talk about Indian civilization, the counter to that is it is basically the Sanskrit civilizations of the Aryans who were the invaders, right? So how would you counter that?
Well, firstly, we have to figure out where does this theory come from. This whole so-called Aryan invasion theory is something that is fabricated by British colonialists at in the towards the end of the 19th century, middle and end of the 19th century, and this is fabricated on a misreading of the term Arya in the Sanskrit text, which just means like gentleman is probably the closest, or just noble person, person of culture. This is what the term Arya means. It's very interesting. Even the Buddha refers to his noble truths as the Arya Satya. Buddha's so is was Buddha an Aryan supremacist? Is this why he was calling this an Arya Satya? So this term Arya is completely distorted, and then of course it gets distorted by British Indologists and then German Indologists who are very eager to prove that they have some roots, because all of these other countries, for instance, the Italians have, say we come from the Roman Empire. All of these countries have more legitimacy, where the Germans are seeking legitimacy. So then they glom onto this term Aryan and then start saying we are the Aryan people. We created Sanskrit because that's the mother of all languages. So all of this comes from the needs of European nationalism and their conflicts within them. This is how this Aryan terms gets created. So there is no legitimacy to this term or to the so-called Aryan invasion theory. But even if we were for a moment to accept it, even if to say there was some Aryan people who came, when did these people come? What is the date when these people came? Do you have a date? So let us say, okay, we take a date 1500 BC, 2000 BC. Isn't it amazing that people in India are being made to fight about, who is Aryan, who is non-Aryan, from something that happened 2000 BC, 4000 years ago, where literally the Anglo-Saxons, the British who came and told us these stories, moved into this land. Nobody's saying, is Britain an Anglo-Saxon country or not? I mean, the Saxons themselves move only in 500 AD into this thing, and there is no such. Um, if you look at indigenous people across the world, right? There many of them have moved into what is called their native territory, way beyond the so-called Aryan invasion happened, which, as I said, the story itself has lots of flaws. It doesn't make very much sense. So all these we have to realize this is part of psychological warfare on Indians. This psychological warfare has been happening from the time of the British colonization, and it accelerates actually after 1857 when there's a revolt against the British. And what they said was, we really need to control the minds of the Indians if we're going to rule them. So a lot of these theories are pushed and put into place at that time as part of psychological warfare. So Aryan invasion is part of psychological warfare, which is saying that, hey, India was never, you always had invaders. Even what you call your native thing is an invasion. So what's the big deal if we also invade? Because this is all that India has happened to India. Now, the funny thing is, if you look at the Sanskrit texts, the ones that are being criticized, they are completely situated in the geography of India. Nobody's extolling some Central Asian homeland that we've come from. Nobody's singing praises to the rivers of Central Asia or the mountains of Central Asia. They are all, or the mythical whatever Caucasus, we don't even know. They keep figuring out where these so-called Aryans came from. But all of the Aryan texts are completely situated in India. As I said, all the way from the Rig Veda to the Vishnu Puran, describing the geography of India, they're all deeply rooted in the Indian landscape. Right? So we have to be wary of psychological warfare, and South Asian is another term as part of that psychological warfare, which has really been imposed on us.
So what is your take on using Indian subcontinent versus South Asia while referring to the region?
I think Indian subcontinent is definitely a better term. And I will say something provocative here, which I haven't really, I'm going to write out in a more academic paper. But my provocative statement is India is actually more legitimate as even a continent than Europe is. If you look geologically, you will see that there is a plate which is now called the Eurasian plate, right? And India is a separate plate that actually bangs into the Eurasian plate, right? So India is completely separate geologically, bangs into this Eurasian plate, forms the Himalayas. And if you look at geologically, if you look at culturally, there, as I said, culturally, there's been a conception of this as a unity for a long time. There is a cultural unity, but that unity should be determined based on the term India, and it's an India-based unity. Not only that, if the Indian continent was a continent on its own, its population would be greater than all other continents. So its population would be several times that of actually twice that of Europe, more than twice that of Europe. Its population would be more 1.5 times that of Africa. Its population would be more than North and South America combined. This is how big the Indian continent would be as a people and as a culture. So I would say, yeah, Indian subcontinent is a better term, or one can use pan-Indian, one can use Greater India, and there is a lot of precedence for that too. Like, for instance, we are sitting here in America, but America is both a country and a continent, right?
Right.
So there is no reason where India cannot both be a country as it is defined now, as well as a continent, or a mass where you refer to this whole region as India, which is how it's always been referred to for millennia.
Sure. Also, when we talk about South Asia, as do you think this benefits people from other countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh more?
Well, I mean, I think they have to decide how they want to be identified. So I'm not going to speak for them, and I'm not going to claim whether they like it or they don't like it. That's something that they have to decide, right? What I'm saying is, as somebody of Indian origin living in America, I find this term racist and insulting to be called South Asian. It's a term of cultural erasure. It erases my roots. It erases my heritage. It denies my civilization. And there's absolutely no reason that I want to be clubbed as a South Asian. I'm an Indian American, and I'm proud of my Indian roots, and I'm proud of being here in America, and America has given a lot of opportunity. And so I'm definitely, and America is a land of hyphenated identities. If you look at it,
Mhm.
in America, hyphenated identity is a very legitimate thing. Italian Americans are proud of being Italian Americans. Greek Americans are being proud of being Greek Americans. Chinese Americans are very happily Chinese American, because the in the American idea, this is part of the diversity of America, that we are here, we are Americans, and we are also having a heritage that is coming from these different places. And why would somebody erase that heritage into this glob of South Asia? So this is really has no. And what the other people, what Pakistani Americans want to call themselves, that's their choice. I wouldn't dictate as an Indian American what they should call themselves.
Sure. So, when we talk about Indian civilization, does that also include, do you also include the contribution from the Mughal rulers?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, India, uh, lot of different people came to India, and they all contributed in their own ways, right? If you look at, it's very interesting. I think I was looking at some kind of um, quote caste list, and then you find even references to Sakyas and all of these different, so many different people over the millennia. I mean, India was the most sought after land. This is why all these people came there. So all of the people came. Some fought, some came peacefully, but whoever came, they became, whoever came and accepted India as their land, became part of the land. So I don't think we need to exclude anybody's contribution to it. Even when the British came, of course, we are speaking in English. So whatever people brought, that is fine, but they don't define India. Well, the point that I'm making is that India and Bharat has existed much before any of them came. And that's true in our text, it's true in our histories, it's true in our indigenous understanding of it. So this has been there around, and of course within that structure, many people came and they contributed and made a unique difference to the Indian culture, and I think all of that can be acknowledged. That's not a problem.
Often people say, and I've had this debate with some of my friends, who contend that India is not a nation, and they say that the pre-independent the states in India, they compare it to the European countries,
Sure.
right? So how do you counter this? That India was just probably a conglomeration of countries, different countries, although they were not technically countries.
Yeah, I think there's two ways. Hopefully, my presentation itself has countered that, because, as I said, there is nobody sings in our nit kriya, in our daily Sanskrit prayers. We are actually chanting the names of the rivers of Bharat, because we consider this our is our sacred land. I don't think anybody in Europe is chanting the names of the rivers of Europe from east to west, right? So there is simply no conception of Europe, which, and there is nobody that is, nobody that there's no Shakti Peethams in Europe that are precisely spread over the boundaries of Europe as in India. And these are popular pilgrimage places that so many millions and millions of Indians go to, and the entire Shakti Peethams literally cover the map of India, right? So there is simply no comparison of India as this civilizational entity where people conceived of it as a unity. Forget about, as I said, it doesn't matter if the story of Shakti is true or not, but the fact that the story exists is true. And the fact the story exists means that people had a conception of this land being connected in a particular way, and this conception was sacred to them, which is why they created all these temples all across it, which are different body parts of Shakti, and they all precisely land in. Why didn't some of them land in China? Why didn't some of them land in Greece? They all precisely fall land over the landmass of India. So that's what I'm saying. That kind of conception, actually, there is no country on the planet which has had such a significant cultural connection and notion of unity that has survived for multi-thousand years. So India is not only, I would say, the most legitimate country, it's also the oldest continuous surviving civilization. And it is something that is a fact, and anybody who's trying to erase or deny it is going into cultural erasure and colonialism and imperialism.
Right, right. So, coming closer to the current times, we have elections in the US in a few months. So, in the context of the US political system, and not just the US, but also the European political system, what is the ramification of using the word South Asia or South Asian?
Yeah, as I said, the term exists to deny India both culturally and politically. Culturally, as I said, I mean, you will find so many stories coming in media about South Asian this, South Asian food, South Asian blah. But almost the entire content of that, now they're even started saying South Asian yoga. Yoga is a Hindu tradition uh, for of thousands of years, and the whole point is to erase India, replace India by South Asian. So, in a political sense, we should resist this as Indian Americans. We should resist this. We don't. Every community, wants to have its identity acknowledged, and this is really, in some senses, a form of white privilege, which is kind of erasing all this into one homogeneous South Asian blob. Again, that Asian or South Asian has no roots in terms of vocabulary in the land of India or the land of Bharat. So politically, we should ask, and also the interests of, even if we look at very pragmatically, the interests of so-called South Asians are not the same politically, right? There's a movement where there's a country which is indulging in terrorism against India. So how can you stand against this terrorism unless you say, well, India, we want to stand for Indian Americans politically, and we want to have a
Yeah,
political voice. You
yeah,
have to very clearly say, I'm an Indian American. This is my stand. Because the idea of erasing this identity is to make it into some kind of glob and then say, oh yeah, it's not legitimate, therefore all these other separatist movements are also legitimate because there never was an India, and so on and so forth. So it's really meant to encourage those separatist movements rather than to have India as a whole. And I would say, even for US policymakers, definitely this is a Cold War trope. In the Cold War, there was a necessity to delegitimize India. They didn't want India to rise as a great power. But right now, US policymakers should really look at whether it serves them. Will it serve them if India is broken up into different countries, and some parts will have terrorism emanating from them and are targeting other countries, and look at what is all the so-called uh, you know far left radical communists who push for the vivisection of India and breaking India. Has the breaking of India in 1947 yielded benefit for those people? Are we better off because it's broken up and all the energy is engaged in fighting with each other? So all those people who claim that they're for human rights and for progress and so on and so forth, obviously if breaking it up into two or three pieces ended up having this huge cost of war and conflict, breaking it into many pieces will cause even more war and conflict. So they're actually not for human rights or progress, they're actually for creating conflict so that the people of India can be controlled and subdued and not be able to reclaim their civilizational trajectory.
And India is basically, the word India, which is given to our country, it's the distortion of the name of a river.
Yes.
So is there merit in claiming a different name for our actual civilization?
Yeah. The names are pretty clear. It was when they're all over the text. It's Bharat and it's Jambu Dweep. Overall it was referred to as Jambu Dweep and as Bharat. So and in fact, even in our constitution, we say India, that is Bharat. So even in the current Indian constitution, the term Bharat is there. So definitely, I think Bharat has a long history, has a long rootedness, and the use of Bharat should definitely be encouraged. But even as I said, India has a much deeper and longer history because it is coming from Sindhu, and it's not just the river Sindhu Desh; it was also Sindhu Desh. So there is a notion of that as a entity, as a cultural and political entity. So I would say yes, I think Bharat term has a lot of weightage, but India also is a very old term in its roots, and a lot of countries have referred to this as variations of India for a long time. So I would say they both have legitimacy. South Asia, on the other hand, absolutely no legitimacy whatsoever.
On the flip side, when we talk to people, when you talk to a common man, the question they often ask is, are you from India? So, in what context or in what parlance do you think the term South Asia is used in current times?
So as I said, for the common man, nobody's looking up South Asian restaurants when they're searching. They're looking for Indian food, they're looking for Indian restaurants, whatever little, and they're looking at India as the source of yoga. They're looking at India as the source of spirituality. So it's not coming from the common man. As I said, this is largely coming from academia. The South Asian studies departments were set up. They were set up as part of counterintelligence. They were set up as part of CIA funding, right? So this is coming from the apparatus of the state, and it's from there that the all the influencers in academia is now teaching journalism school in Columbia, and then they're teaching all these journalists that you have to use South Asian. So all of this is coming from a systematic imperialism and power play of the academia. So it is an imperialistic and colonialistic trope and word. And the unfortunate thing is that so many children who go to the university of Indian origin are being South Asianized. They are being made into this blob, and that is being pushed, and it's somehow considered progressive to erase one's roots and cultural. It's being pushed as a progressive idea, where and this is one of the reasons people got so angry at my article, which says that South Asian is a term of cultural erasure, because it calls out the BS that this is a progressive idea. Erasing roots is not a progressive idea. It's a imperialistic and colonial idea, and we need to challenge that.
Yes, I mean, this is an interesting point because this whole notion, the people at the other end of the political or the ideological spectrum, the left, we all know that their constant argument is, India was a nation only since India has been a nation only since 1947. And this has got a lot to do with the way we have been taught in the schools right from a young age. And changing the structure of the educational system is going to be a Herculean effort, right? So uh, today we have a government which is more likely to look at this, through a friendly lens. But if we are going to be a government agnostic, uh, you know, tomorrow there could be some other government in power. What steps can the government or should the government take to address this, the whole issue of South Asian
Which
versus
which which
Indian?
government which government are you referring to?
I'm talking about any government. I mean, let's
Are you
talk
talking
about
about the government in the United States? Or are you talking about the government in India?
the government in India.
Okay. So right now I'm really addressing this as I said, an Indian American. And if I look at the context of which is really part of the debate, like it's not in India, it's not like South Asian is being used a great deal by the people of India. It's really happening as I said, driven by the US Academy. And even in the US Academy, there's a lot of precedence for people contesting their identity. The Native Americans were called Red Indians at one time, and that's considered an abusive term right now.
Mhm.
So different people groups in the United States have come forward, and they have challenged the academia and their stereotyping and the way they talk of these things are talked about. And similarly, when the academia is fabricating the South Asian thing, it is up to Indian Americans to stand up and say, no, this is a term of denigration. This is a racist term. It's a term of abuse. And we don't want this term to be used. We do not want to be addressed as that. We have a long heritage as people of Indian origin, and that's what we really want to do.
Yeah,
This is
but
how we want to be called and addressed as. We need to. It's like this is a time where people are sensitive. And when I was into having the discussion on Twitter and all of these other things, the for instance, white people or other people who are engaging with me, they're completely being sensitive to this. When I say I want to be called Indian American, they're not saying, no, I'm going to call you South Asian. The
sure.
people who are the most resistance are the equivalent of the Uncle Toms. The people, it is the South, the people who from India who've now started themselves calling themselves South Asian magazine, South Asian blog, South Asian this. Those are the people that are the most resistant because they've internalized that colonial trope, and they want to be, better brown sepoys than other brown sepoys, and they want to keep pushing South Asian. So it is those people that are really the ones who are pushing South Asian. The mainstream America will be very happy to be educated. They'll be very happy to be sensitive once we speak out and say we want to be called Indian Americans and not South Asian Americans.
Yeah, my question in the Indian context was not about the use of South Asian, but people more say that India was not a nation before 1947.
Right, and that I mean, my whole talk is addressing that question, right? My whole talk has been saying that we've had a conception of this land being a cultural unity for millennia, and many times in that it's also been a political unity. So
So do you think that there is a scope for government to take steps in this regard, apart from changing
you
the?
mean saying the government of India
Yeah,
here? Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the government of India, a lot of the problems come from the colonization of the education system in India. And
right.
as I said, even if you look at the curriculum today, it's like so absurd how the texts and histories that were perpetuated by the British, and the Mill's history, and so James Mill and Strachey, all of these, what they're reading today are based on those histories, whether they're reading those texts directly or not. What they're reading today is on the parampara of the British. It is the British colonial histories that are just been updated, let us say. And what we really need to do is revise and challenge this, because these histories were implanted there for the purpose of imperialism and colonialism. Things like Aryan invasion were created to legitimize invasion, legitimize colonialism, and we don't need to be stuck on that. So absolutely, I think there is scope for the government. But the government, I am not a person who actually relies on the government very much. As many people know, I started my own publication house called Garuda, and the aim of Garuda is to help us decolonize our histories. And we are, if there's a lot of information that comes in the public domain, there's good academic study, well researched work that comes out that is challenging this. At some point the government will cannot ignore that weight of scholarship. We have a new book coming out which is on Hindu mathematics, and I'd love to do have a talk about that later, about how pretty much all of modern math has its origin in Hindu mathematics, how the concepts of the decimal system came about, binary system, algebra, trigonometry, all of these can be traced to Indian texts. And there's a PhD from IIT Kanpur who's done a phenomenal job, Bhaskar Kamble, in writing this book. So people, I encourage you to follow Garuda Prakashan on Twitter, or look for Garuda Prakashan. And so, what I'm saying is that we shouldn't rely on the government. Let us start our own initiative. Let us take
Sure.
initiative and change it, and then the government will force to be paid attention once all the data is on the table, all the facts are on the table.
Sure. I think we have time for just about one more question. I think the last question is, if we use geographical location as a basis for cultural identity, then as a part of the definition of Indian subcontinent, should we not also be including other regions like Sumatra, apart from Pakistan and Bangladesh?
No. As I said, if you look at the ancient text, the boundaries and definition of Bharatvarsh are fairly clear. And it is saying the land which is bounded on the south by the ocean, and on the north by the Himalayas, right? So that entity is fairly clear. It is true that, of course, India had a lot of influence on Southeast Asia, even even on China and even on Japan. The Saraswati is a goddess in Japan. All of the Ganesha is there in Japan. All of Southeast Asia you will find is suffused with Indian culture. But that doesn't mean to say that this is not how our ancients conceptualized. They didn't conceptualize as part of Bharatvarsha. They didn't conceptualize it part of Jambudweep. So we have to look at those, how they conceptualized it. And secondly, the language issue comes very important. All these countries, if you look at their languages, they're very close to Sanskrit. So we have been a Sanskrit civilization. It is that Sanskrit civilization that had this great influence. If you look at everything that the Sanskritic civilization produced, the so-called English civilization of India has no impact. It has no, even today, it is the yoga which is coming from the Sanskrit civilization that is spreading all across the world. It's ancient Indian spirituality which is influencing the world. Who really cares about what English Indians are producing? Almost no one,
Mhm.
right? So all of our impact has come from the Sanskritic civilization, and as we go and reclaim our languages as well, you will find that all these East Asian countries and other countries will find a closer affinity to an India which is based on Sanskrit civilization, which is what they were connected to, versus an India which is stuck on English.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sankrantji. This has really been very enlightening. There are a lot more questions, but I guess we have run out of time. And thank you for making time for this today. I believe today is a rather busy day for you. You have an official launch coming up.
Yes, absolutely. There was this book, Delhi Riots 2020, which was again canned by a colonial intervention by a British publisher who controls what Indians can read or see, or get to write. And so Garuda picked it up, and that book has become a big, huge bestseller. And we are having a launch event 3 p.m. India time. If you go to the Facebook page of Garuda, Garuda Prakashan on Facebook, or on Twitter, Garuda Prakashan, you can tune into the event. Rajiv Malhotra will be the keynote speaker. Other people are there. So it'll be a very interesting discussion. Hope and encourage everybody to tune in for that. Also go to Garuda Books and get your own copy of Delhi Riots 2020. And also become part of this movement. We want to have people who are regularly buying this series of books for decolonization. We're also going to have a Book of the Month Club where people can get a book every month. And this is part of the whole decolonization project. So please become part of it. Write for us. Spread the word. Let's change the narrative, and let's reclaim our own narrative.
Thank you, Mr. Sankrantji. Wish you all the best and all the success. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.